His Excellency William Ruto, the President of the Republic, here with different colleagues from different media houses. And Mr. President, thank you for staying with us. You didn't leave us. It's a good thing for a host. But let's talk about a very important conversation, that is education. On 23rd of January, Kenyans are supposed to take back their children, those who are parents, back to school. What do you think? Because junior secondary, grade 7, reports back to their primary schools. When you're thinking about this, what do you envision will be the sort of conversation and activities in that school where you have now primary schools, kids or children between grade 1 and 6, you have a junior secondary learner, you also have a standard 8 learner, yet the teachers, yes, there's a process to employ, but so far no one is ready to teach that grade 7 as of now.
First, let me give you the background. As I said earlier, education is one of the most precious things that any nation, anywhere, places a premium on. And it is especially for Kenya, because the biggest resource that we have as a country is our human capital. Today, our human capital earns us more money than all the other tea, coffee, our remittances from Kenyans who work, 400 billion plus every year. So it tells you the importance of our human capital, number one. Number two, as you've said correctly, every parent, myself included, you think about the education of your child. And therefore, it's a very emotional, it's a very important issue. So the change, the transition to CBC, from where I sit, is a correct transition. There could have been some missteps. Maybe it was, maybe we should have taken an extra 1 or 2 years to make sure that we get the teachers on board, we get all the other facilities on board. But that's now water under the bridge. That's why it was also a conversation in this election. And I took the decision that for us to get professional advice, let us put together a presidential working party of educationists and other stakeholders. And they have done a good job. They've talked to teachers, they've talked to parents, they've talked to other stakeholders, people who run schools and everybody else, and it was unanimous. 86% of 20,000 people that were engaged said they wanted the junior secondary to be near the parents, because many of these children are still young. Their parents need to look after them, to make sure that they are fine. And also, it reduces on the cost of education. If you have to take your child to a secondary school, far away, maybe in a boarding school, it costs more. So I think the unanimous decision was made, and I believe that that is the correct decision. We also agreed that that transition is going to happen for all our children, that are in grade 6. They will all transit to, because we still insist on the 100% transition. They will move to junior secondary. And as government, we took the decision that we are going to hire an extra 30,000 teachers, the largest ever, to make sure that that transition is not only smooth. And next year, we're going to hire another 30,000 teachers, just because of budgetary reasons, to make sure that our education is seamless. That presidential working party, I also tasked them, not just to look at CBC, but to look at our TVET institutions, to look at our university institutions, the whole education sector, because that is the sector that makes Kenya what it is, right? So apart from the transition and the CBC, also the TVET program, which has been my pet project, and I pushed it ever since I was Minister for Higher Education, slowed down the last 4 years because of politics, But now, we're going to hire another 2,000 tutors this January to make sure that we are up to date with the skills and competencies that are being taught in our TVET institutions, especially those focusing on engineering, because that's the direction we are going.
All right, before we get to TVET, Mr. President, let me take you back to the Presidential Working Party on Education Reform. They are recommending that grade 7, 8, and 9 be domiciled within the primary school setup. Now, you mentioned the Teacher Service Commission has advertised 30,000 positions. These include interns and those permanent and pensionable as well. But does this address the gap? Because this would mean then that we need more teachers to address the transition within primary school that we may need to address the transition to secondary schools. Do these 30,000 teachers fit to address this transition to both primary and secondary school?
Absolutely. In fact, the Teacher Service Commission are the professionals. We give them the latitude to decide how many of the teachers will help in the transition to junior secondary, how many of the teachers will assist in the continuing secondary education, and how many of them will go to primary. So that is the decision of professionals, and it is the expertise that we have in the Teacher Service Commission is able to tell us where the numbers are. Of course, we could do with a lot more teachers, and that is why I'm saying phase 1, we're going to hire 30,000. Next year, we're going to hire 30,000, and progressively, as we committed ourselves in our manifesto, by year 5, we will have hired 110,000 additional teachers.
A very important transition.
To make sure that that whole transition metrics goes on.
Mr. President, a very important transition bit for the class 7. And of course, the report on ground is that then the government will be hiring teachers, like one teacher for every class 7 class. Of course, this is a big transition. How then will they manage 14 subjects for these very students, understanding very well that we're taking specialization angle?
Of course, you know, the resources will be shared, you know, between the secondary schools that exist at the moment. We are also going to work with, we have teachers who have already graduated to degree level who are teaching in the primary. We are going to identify those teachers to come and support the junior secondary transition. So we have sat down for long hours with TSC. They have mapped out how many teachers are diploma teachers who are teaching in primary, how many are graduate teachers who are teaching in primary, who can now support the junior secondary, how many can we transition this way, that way, and what can we do to make sure that we leverage on the employment that's going to happen next year. So all that is mapped out because it is important for us to provide a transition for all our children and ground our education properly. And as I speak to that point, allow me just to speak about our university education. Part of what we have informed the Presidential Working Party on Education Reform is to make sure that they give us the correct recommendation, because our position is that we should be able to create a merger between the TVET funding board, the university funding board, the higher education loans board, because all these boards are putting students in this university, they are putting students in that college. This one is organizing bursary, and nobody is talking to nobody. We need a system that ensures that we are taking so many students to college X. That's why we are giving them so much money, and that's why we are allocating them so much bursary, so that our education system is grounded on sound economics. As we talk now, most of our universities are bankrupt. Egerton University, one of our universities, the CEO has been taken to court, is almost in jail. You know, and the reason is we are giving between 52 and 55% of the requirements of our universities. It is time we sat down and assigned all our universities the students that we have the capacity to fund and to give bursary.
Right. Still on junior.
Otherwise, if we continue this way, we are going to lower the education of our universities, and it's going to affect our human capital development, and that we don't want to do.
Still on junior secondary, Mr. President, what should parents expect in supporting their students in junior secondary? As we speak right now, we have parents across the country who are in limbo because their schools their children are in do not have facilities, adequate facilities for them to transition to grade 7. Now, these parents will be staring at perhaps transferring their children to different schools, which again is a cost they did not anticipate. How will the government work about this to ensure that every child remains in school?
Michelle, I don't think any parent will be advised to transfer their children to any other school. Because number one, we do not have a shortage of classrooms. Yeah? We have, in every primary school, we have an extra classroom for grade 7 to go to. That's number one. We are sorting out the teachers. We are sorting out the curriculum. That's all in place. The only thing that is going to be pending, and we intend to have a conversation with our members of parliament, is to build for them within 1 year a laboratory. Yeah? In fact, it is possible to convert some of the extra classrooms that were already built into laboratories. And it is possible for schools that share the same compound with the secondary schools for the grade 7 to carry out their laboratory work in the secondary school. So we have all manner of permutations to make sure that we sort out this transition. I am not saying it is going to be, I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but I want to promise you it's doable. You know, we have all hands on deck. You know, everybody is working seamlessly, and I want to thank also our members of parliament. They are very keen to support this transition with their allocation of CDF.
Mr. President, as you transition to the next topic, on that education matter, you're talking about bringing together the University Fund, TVET Fund, and HELB. According to the current budget, the University Fund has been allocated 91.2 billion shillings, or rather University Education, sorry. HELB, 15.8 billion shillings. TVET capitation, 5.2 billion shillings. And I'm just wondering, even if you put the body that is financing students together with the body that is financing these institutions, at the end of the day, it's a question of resources. So how does that resolve if your government cannot allocate revenue?
Already, we are pushing the resources that are available for Higher Education Loans Board, you know, to 21 billion. Yeah, that will be reflected shortly. We are also working with the university, and that's why I made it a subject of the Presidential Working Party, because we need some candid talk and firm decisions on how many students should we admit. Yeah? How many students can we fund? And how much money can the bursary we have, how many students can the bursary we have support? You know, so that we don't send students to a college or a university and there is no commensurate financing to support their education. You know, it is just basic logic. So this is the conversation that we need to have. And in my opinion, it should be possible as you place a student, you must also know, is there funding for the education of that child? And is there supporting bursary to make sure that that child finishes that?
But we have situations, Mr. President, where universities like Mount Kenya University will have more students in the School of Medicine than the University of Nairobi. What's your take on HELB supporting students in private universities more than those in public universities?
That's the conversation we're going to have.
Ultimately, Mr. President.
That's the conversation we are going to have, because we need to interrogate, you know, how feasible is it for government to support so many students with little money instead of supporting the number of students that they can with adequate resources to make sure that they get the correct training. So that's the conversation we're going to have. And we're going to have it with public universities, and we're going to have that conversation even with the private universities. And possibly we could, where we are not able to finance, we have to be honest with ourselves. Let me give you a practical situation, Michelle. We have students in academies. They pay 100,000, 200,000 a term, right? All through, from standard 1 to Form 4. But when they go to university, we want to tell them we can pay for all of them. Why? If a parent is able to pay for their child in primary and in secondary, why don't we allow them to pay for their child in university? so that we support the children of the people who cannot afford. Why, for example, would my daughter or son of William Ruto be given bursary in the university when William Ruto can afford? Or for that matter, Ken Michungu here, or James Matt. You know, I'm sure that you guys can. So we really have to be honest. We really have to.
Now, allow for me to ask this question.
We really have to be honest with that, and I'm sorry if I say.
So that's an interesting conversation.
We really have to be honest with our